Hi, this is Dr. Tom Rogers at Performance Medicine, coming to you with the weekly podcast of the Common Sense MD. Today I'm going to talk about something that's dear to my heart and my taste buds. I'm excited about it. It's called honey. It's been one of my favorite foods for many years since I was a little kid. And I've really recently becoming more interested in it because I've gotten to know several beekeepers, including my brother, who just got some hives last year. He's retired and has the time to do it. So I've done a lot of research on honey. I've used it as the most natural medicine to promote healing. Honey is loaded with antioxidants and antibacterial properties, also antiviral properties. Certainly when I had COVID-19, I loaded up with Manuka honey, which I'll talk about in a minute. I've treated coughs, sore throats, colds, skin rashes, ulcers on the skin for years with honey. A lot of plastic surgeons will have you use honey on your incisions rather than anything else, and it works really well. It's kind of sticky, though, of course. But it heals wounds and burns. It really reacts with the body's own fluids and produces hydrogen peroxide. Does that ring a bell? With IV vitamin C, it turns into hydrogen peroxide, which is very healing. So I've treated a lot of things with this. It's even, honey can be medical grade as well. The FDA has approved it to treat wounds medically. There's a lot of studies about it, and it also has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. It's a flavonoid. There's a lot of studies that show it works better for coughs than dextromethorphan. Much better, as a matter of fact. Works better than Benadryl. It protects your heart. It dilates your arteries. Prevents blood clots. It decreases your blood pressure. It decreases your cholesterol. Decreases the LDL portion of your cholesterol and increases the HDL. I've used it for years on mosquito bites. I'm really sensitive to mosquito bites. And I'll dab a little honey on a mosquito bite, and it immediately takes the itch and the sting away. I've used it on canker sores. It works really well for that. The thing about honey is it treats allergies as well, because it has pollen in it. Remember that. It's important. So it's almost like immunotherapy. It helps your immune system. It certainly helps allergy sufferers because it slowly desensitizes you to things you may be sensitive to, like ragweed and some of the things like that bees love to go to. Now, one important point I want you to realize is that you have to use raw, local, unpasteurized, unfiltered honey for it to have all those great benefits. Pasteurized honey that you're going to find in jars mostly at the grocery store has no pollen in it. So it's really not as helpful, nearly as helpful. And a lot of times what I found, I did some research on it and talked to a lot of the growers, beekeepers, and they say a lot of the honey, even in the grocery stores, it's advertised as local honey, has been pasteurized, stripped, and has no pollen in it. And they also can substitute high fructose corn syrup in there to make it look clear and make it look prettier. So there's a lot of lawsuits going on about this, but so you have to get it. You really don't want to get it in the grocery store at all, even if it says local raw honey. You need to get it from your local farmer's market or your local bee grower. And maybe starting this week at my office. I'll keep you in tune on that. So I'm really excited about that. And I'll tell you, there's nothing that tastes sweeter and better than raw, local, unpasteurized, unfiltered honey. It's just amazing the way it tastes. It helps your skin because it holds water in the skin. It's a great pre-workout energy source. I used it since I was in college. Before I trained for tennis or worked out, I would get honey. I probably at that time wasn't getting the great stuff like I am now. As a matter of fact, I guarantee I wasn't because I was buying it at the store. It treats acne, especially if you combine it with nutmeg. It's great for acne. It even helps dandruff and seborrheic dermatitis. You mix it, dilute it with water so it's not as sticky, but you leave it on your scalp or face for a while, and it's really, really good for that. Even helps your digestion. It helps bloating. It helps constipation. I like to add lemon with it in tepid water. I think it works great for that. It helps you sleep because it helps your body release its own melatonin and L-tryptophan naturally. It helps weight loss because it replaces sugars. Honey has a lower glycemic index than a lot of foods. The glycemic ratio is about 50. When I did my continuous glucose monitor, my Freestyle Libre on the back of my arm, I did notice that honey did not move my sugar levels hardly at all. So I really did not bump my sugars, my blood glucose levels, and a lot of stuff did. So it's really interesting. What really gets me going, though, is talking about bees. Bees are just amazing animals. I've learned a lot through my brother and through a lot of the growers that have their own multiple beehives. And they work these beehives. If you don't work them, and it's work, then you're not going to have a good colony or several colonies. Bees are so interesting. The thing about bees is they're important. 1/3 of all foods would not be possible without bees because you're talking about pollination, spreading of seeds. It's so important that almost half of living things would die without bees. You wouldn't have fruits, vegetables, spices, herbs, nuts, and oils. It's been documented to be around since the Egyptian times, and way before then. Just don't document it. Bees are in trouble. Since the 1990s, there's been beehives that are disappearing because of pesticides. We live in a very toxic world, as I talk about all the time. It's called colony collapse disorder. And it's been really disastrous for a lot of beekeepers. It affects the bees both physically and mentally. Mentally because they can't find their way back to the hives. It affects them so much. So raw, local honey, having no high fructose corn syrup in it, it's so important. And look at the labels. Make sure it's local. Now there is an interesting kind of honey that I talked about before. It's Manuka honey. Now most all that comes from New Zealand. Some of it comes from Australia. It has some special properties in it, and it really has more antibacterial properties for healing than your local honey. It's because of these unique Manuka factors that they put in it. It comes from Manuka bush in New Zealand. So these factors, I think they range from like 5 to 25. The higher, the more expensive. It can get expensive, but the more antibacterial qualities it has. Certainly I have Manuka honey here at all times. I don't use it daily like I do the raw local honey, but I have it on hand. If I start to feel bad, I start using the Manuka honey. It has several signature compounds in it: leptospirin, dihydroxyacetone, and methyl glyoxyl. But with any honey, you could eat too much of it, especially if you're diabetic. So you don't need to eat it all day long for sure. And kids under 1 year of age do not need any honey. They can't process it. But I do use it daily. I have on reserve Manuka honey at all times with a high factor in it. The thing about honey, too, it doesn't spoil. Sometimes it'll crystallize a little bit, but one tip I'll give you, do not put it in your microwave because it destroys a lot of the good properties that it has. But bees are so interesting to me. Bees are very social creatures. The communication between them is just amazing. I mean, I think one hive has about 40,000 bees in it. One bee in its lifetime will only produce about 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. So think how many bees and how much work that they do to make the honey that we get. So there's three types of bees in a colony. Worker bees. Not ironically, worker bees, like in humans, are all female. The females are the ones that do all the work, kind of like in the human race, in my opinion. They're also the only ones that have stingers in them with them. And they die after they sting one time, so you don't want to get stung by them because you cause the death of a female worker bee. They have these wax glands, special wax glands, and it's really neat the way they work. The drones are the males, and they, of course, fertilize the virgin queen bee. That's the other type of bee, is a queen bee. Usually there's one per colony, and then after they fertilize them, they die. The male or the drones are bigger, and they eat a lot more. Kind of like, they're more lazy, kind of like the male species with humans. They're more lazy, they eat more, they're bigger, and but you do have to have them because they fertilize the queen bee. Now, the queen bee is really interesting too. The queen bee's rather large, has an elongated shaped face, and is involved, of course, in laying eggs, reproducing. The one queen bee in her lifetime can lay up to 1 million eggs. She lives for about 2 to 3 years, sometimes up to 5. And the worker bees, they don't live but a few months. Same thing with the drones. But it's really interesting how the whole colony works and this kind of orientation that they have to communicate. They usually fly about 5 miles within the hive, and they land on these flowers, and they cause pollination, which is the way flowers reproduce. A flower has a male and a female part, and the bees are responsible for helping pollinate along with the wind, so that they can produce seeds and reproduce on these flowers. That's really interesting. And these female worker bees have these sacs. They go in and they suck the nectar out of these flowers, and the nectar is stored in these honey stomachs, which is not part of their digestive tract. And then when they get back to the hive, they pass this. They use it for energy themselves. That's how bees survive. But they pass it on to these other worker bees that chew on it for about 30 minutes, and these enzymes turn it into a substance that they can deposit in these little cells, these little honeycombs, and when it's full, then they seal them over with wax. So you've all seen the honeycombs that are so interesting. But that's how they get their energy, and it takes so many of them to make the honey that we eat. And so it's just an interesting thing. We want to keep our honeybees alive because the honey is so vital to our food supply. And it's just really interesting the way they coordinate their services. They're the ultimate business organization for production, in my opinion. Everybody kind of knows what they're good at, and they all have their function, and they communicate so well. It's interesting, when I visit the beekeepers and look at how they work. Number one, most of them aren't afraid of getting stung. Occasionally they will get stung. But they they take these smokers, and the smokers kind of sedate the bees so they're able to contain a swarm or split the hive. And it's just so interesting to watch these things work. And when you taste raw, local, unfiltered, unpasteurized honey, you'll be amazed at how different it tastes and how sweet it is. And it's how good it is for you in many, many uses of honey. So I certainly look forward to stocking all my offices with this raw honey for patients. Anybody wants to come pick some up. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. I love honey. I know you do too. It's so vital for us. It's vital for our health and our food supply. So come get some raw local honey. It's Dr. Tom Rogers. I'll see you next week.